sibling relationships are so are my weak point in books. Like a well-written sibling relationship will always make me love a book. Hi, hello, and welcome to my December book recap. If you're new here, my name is Trina. I am in the middle of learning how to film end of year booktube content for the first time because it's my first time doing it. So I'm kind of throwing this video into the midst of 2024 summary content because I still want to talk about the books I read in December. It wasn't the best reading month for me, only like one new all-time fave, but I still got to my book goal, and that is all that matters. I read at least 8 books, and that is the important part. And with the holidays and everything going around, you don't always have time for as much reading as you want, and that's okay. Other updates, Christmas just happened. I got a wireless microphone set from my best friend for Christmas, which I thought was so sweet. So I will have to set that up at some point, and maybe the mic quality will improve, so hold for that. So in the hopes of keeping this video somewhat short and sweet, let's get into it. Starting off with the first category of books, I will zoom through because these are all books that I have read for a vlog or have read for a vlog that's going to come out. So I don't need to talk about them a ton because I have videos that talk about them a ton. The first 2 books were for my holiday rom-com reading video. The first book was Most Wonderful by Georgia Clark. I did like this book. I think it's kind of faded from my memory very quickly, but I remember finishing it and just compare in the midst of the rom-coms, I was like, this is a highlight amidst the rom-coms. I ended up giving this book 4 stars, maybe 4.5. It's probably more like 4 stars. Let's give it 4 stars. This was a rom-com book, obviously holiday themed because that was the video I was reading it for, that was set in a wealthy TV star's mansion in the Cascades or something like that. And her 3 children, who all have different dads and are coming from vastly different backgrounds, have all come home for Christmas. And we're following each of them as they're dealing with their own interpersonal and romantic conflicts. And I thought it was a really good balance of interpersonal conflicts with romantic ones. I didn't think the third act breakup, when you have 3 characters to follow, the third act breakup cannot be that dramatic. So the third act breakups were all pretty normal, and I loved each individual couple. My favorite was definitely Liz and Violet. I loved them. And then there was also dynamics between the siblings and their mom that they're home visiting for the holidays that I thought was really well written and really sweet, and I enjoyed it. I had a good time reading this book, and it was a bright spot in the video. The second book for that video was not a bright spot. This book, Make the Season Bright by Ashley Herring Blake. I gave this book such a rant in that video, and I broke it down extensively. If you want more hater energy, you can feel free to watch that video. But yeah, I gave this book 1 star. Pretty much the worst book I read this year. I didn't mention it in any of my 2024 recaps, but I kind of wanted to fade into obscurity after this video. I never want to think about this book again. It really made me mad. This is a romance between 2 musicians, one kind of a country musician, one a violinist in New York, who used to be the love of each other's lives until one of them, Brighton, left the other, what is her name? Charlotte? She left Charlotte at the altar 5 years ago. There was a Goodreads review that really summarized my thoughts in this book, and I remember, because I was scrolling through the Goodreads reviews here because I also wrote a long rant. This Goodreads review was there's only one reason why I would forgive you if you left me at the altar: if you got in a car accident on the way. That would be the only reason. And I agree. I hated this romance so much. It is kind of supposed to be a second chance vibe where they're forced to come together for the holidays because they have mutual friends they didn't realize were sisters. And in that scenario, then they're forced together by a blizzard to share one bedroom, and they realize that they still love each other. I just hated that the author tried to make the point of the book be that Charlotte, the girl who was left at the altar, was actually the villain, was actually a terrible person and deserved to be left at the altar. And I'm okay, well, if you thought she was so bad that she did deserve to be left at the altar, then why did these 2 characters get together? So on a basic level, these characters should not be together. They were terrible for each other, hated them together. And at a second level, if either of them were so bad that the leaving at the altar was justified, then this is a villain story, not a rom-com. So overall, terrible concept and then terribly executed. And I say more in that video, but those are just, you get the gist. Another video I read for my Wicked reading vlog, where I consumed like all the Wicked related content I could leading up to watching the new movie that came out. I read the book Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West by Gregory Maguire. This book was okay. I think I really wanted to like it. Sometimes books aren't hurt by high expectations. They're actually like buoyed by high expectations, where like I'm willing to like be like, well, this part could have been good because I went into it wanting it to be good. And in the end, it just really wasn't. I gave it 3 stars. I think it's a generous 3 stars in hindsight, but we'll leave it there. Obviously, if you don't know Wicked, it's following the Wicked Witch of the West from the Wizard of Oz book. And yeah, it's supposed to be like mostly about like the world building of the Oz universe, but everything was so underbuilt and under-discussed, and like the world building was the good part, but I really wanted a character-centered story focusing on the Wicked Witch of the West, because that's what the book is called, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West. And it really wasn't that. It was really just like what happened in Oz 20 years leading up to the Wizard of Oz book, vaguely following the character of Elphaba throughout. So yeah, I was just not a fan in the end, and I just don't think it set out to achieve what it wanted to. I did like the bare bones of the story. I just didn't really like Gregory Maguire's style for like jumping from thing to thing and never going into depth about anything. It's like the second anything starts getting remotely deep, he's like, nope, new topic, new subject. And you just can't get into a book like that. The last book, I really won't go into detail about because I don't want to give spoilers, but I read Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson for an upcoming reading vlog. And this is my first Brandon Sanderson ever. So I actually won't give my rating. I'll keep myself very secretive, but I did want to throw it out because I finished it on New Year's Eve. That I read this book and I did like it. And I'll share my rating in that video, and I'll share my feelings about it in that video. But I did enjoy it, and I will be reading more Brandon Sanderson, potentially in that video. You will have to see. This is a fantasy book set in an alternate universe where people can burn metal, is like the magic system. They like can consume metal and then burn it in their stomachs to gain extra powers. And in this world, a emperor, like an evil lord ruler, has been ruling as like a god ruler for thousands of years, hundreds of years, a long time. And the world as a result has been like destroyed by him. So now they're trying to overthrow him. But yeah, like I said, very, very vague. Going into books I can give a little bit more detail about. I consumed 4 audiobooks this month. 4? How many books? Yeah, I consumed 4 audiobooks this month, all of which were great. I had a really good time with audiobooks this month. The first audiobook I listened to and finished was Hope in the Dark. What was it called? There's a long title. Hope in the Dark, The Untold History of People Power by Rebecca Solnit. I read this off of recommendation by the Book Leo. It's kind of a older nonfiction. It was like written in the aftermath of George Bush being elected for a second term, which is very relevant at the moment, honestly. And like a lot of the stuff she had to say about that felt very relevant still. And it's depressing that it's still relevant 20 years later. It's crazy also that it was 20 years ago. But yeah, I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't quite a 5-star for me. It was kind of out of date, kind of old. And it says sort of it's supposed to be like an untold history of people power, but it pretty much only talks about like movements in the 1990s and early 2000s. It doesn't really go into any detail about like older movements or stuff like that, which I kind of was expecting. So it was just a little bit vague, but there were a lot of great quotable moments in this book, especially in the beginning, about hope and holding out for hope and about coming together with your community for community issues and things like that I think are really relevant in the present moment. So I don't not recommend it because I gave it 4 stars. I liked it, but I'm very generous with my star ratings for my nonfictions. So for a 4-star, there were just some problems that I wasn't like a huge fan of it, but I did still like the book. And especially if you are feeling a little bit down and out at the moment because of world events, I recommend picking this up and remembering that throughout history there have always been people that are trying to give us hope instead of take it away, and that is a very important job as well. The next audiobook I listened to in December was A Curse for True Love. This was a direct follow-up. I had just finished The Ballad of Never After in November, so I was like, you know what, instead of waiting 3 months to finish this series, I'm just gonna consume the third book right away. And you know what, I actually really liked this. I think I might have gone in with lower expectations because I know some people have said that the last book in the series is their least favorite for this trilogy of books, but I really liked this third book. We get new perspectives for the first time. The first 2 books are only in the main female character Evangeline's perspective, versus the last book shows both the characters of her love interest Jax and the perspective of the villain Apollo. And I thought it was so cool to give the villain a perspective and like upped the stakes of the story significantly. About half of this book is about Evangeline trying to get her memories back after Apollo stole them at the end of the second book. These are spoilers if you haven't read the series in hindsight. Sorry, but they've been out for a while, okay? But I won't spoil the very, very ending, but basically there's much higher stakes than there were in the last 2 books, stakes that I could understand. We spent the first 2 books basically just being like, we have to find the Valerie Arch, which we don't know what does, and we don't know why we need to find it, and we don't really know if it really does the thing that people say that it does, because pretty much everyone in the series lies all the time. Versus the third book, there were very clear stakes to me, like, this is the villain. We have to try to defeat him. We have to try to survive him. We have to try to make our love interests come back together despite her losing her memories of this love. So I really did like that, and I gave this book 4 stars. This was my favorite in the series. Well, I wonder if it's because Stephanie Garber has kind of like a unique writing style, and I think most people maybe used Caravel, the first trilogy in this like world, to get into that writing style, and then they came into Once Upon a Broken Heart, the first book in this trilogy, like primed and ready for her writing, so that's why they love the first 2 books so much. Versus for me, it took me 2 books to like get into it and enjoy it. But when I did, it was a good time. And I really loved the audiobooks for this series. I think the audiobooks do a great time. And I thought the narrators for the male characters in the last book also did a great job. And he added like a different vibe to the story that I really liked. Yeah, I don't necessarily recommend this series for everyone, but I do think it was the silly, lighthearted, fun fantasy time that people on BookTube said it was going to be, so I wasn't disappointed on that front. The third audiobook I read this month was my top book of the month, my favorite book of the month for sure, and that is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I'm sure you've heard of this book. It's a really well-known memoir that I've been meaning to listen to or read for a while, but I like listening to my memoirs. I've said this before. I like when the author of a memoir is telling their own story to you. I think that's really beautiful. Crying in H Mart is a story about how Michelle Zauner's mother, who she grew up with and had kind of like a tumultuous relationship with, she got cancer and she passed away, and how Michelle dealt with her grief with the passing of her mother was attempting to reconnect more with her Korean heritage, that her mother was Korean and her dad is white, so her mother was this gateway also to an entire part of her identity that she felt like she never really could access fully. So with her mother's sickness, she learned to cook a lot of Korean food and visit Korean grocery stores and like make all these recipes that her mother had made her whole life. And it's like this beautiful way of describing like love and grief. And oh, I just love this book. I wrote like a really long review where I was just in my feels, because you go into this book knowing it's going to be about grief, and then she just hits you over the head with how much this book is about love and different types of love, and her love for her boyfriend Peter, and how he takes care of her, and how her parents love each other in their own way, and how her mom loves her sisters back in Korea and loves Korea, and how Michelle in her own way loves Korea and loves her mom so much, and how her mom loves her. And although the book is devastating and I sobbed my eyes out because I am a big crier, as I probably should be established because I'm constantly like, this book made me cry. But this book makes anyone who is a crier cry. It is so emotional and so beautifully written. And when I was writing my review for it afterwards, I was listening to the writer, Michelle Zauner, is actually a musician. So I was also listening to the album she wrote about her mom while writing my review, and I was just sobbing my eyes out. It's just like, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Beautiful connection about like the immigrant experience as well, and like what an immigrant family feels like, and what it feels like to have a parent be the gatekeeper to a culture that is a massive part of your personality, but never really fully belong to it because it's your parents' culture, not yours. And even though your parent says that you are Korean in this book, or you are a part of that culture, you are Korean because of them. She's Korean because of her mom. And without her mom, how does she feel that attachment to her own identity and her own sense of belonging in the world? And that's so relatable and so emotional. And yeah, this book hit, and I really love it. And if you have not yet read it, or if you have not listened to any music by the author, her band's name is Japanese Breakfast, and I think it's beautiful. The book was beautiful, the music is beautiful. Love. Lastly, for my audiobooks, I finally finished a nonfiction that I've been working on for 2 months. I first read the physical book, then the library hold ended for that. So I instead was like, frick, I have to just get the audiobook instead, because it's like a 600-page nonfiction, so it's gonna take me forever to get through, so I decided I'll go for the audiobook instead, and that is Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations on Race by Beverly Daniel Tatum. This was a pretty good nonfiction book. It's kind of out of date, which is the main reason it didn't get like 5 stars. It's like 20 years old, 25 years old. A lot of it's still very, very relevant. Like, we haven't changed that much as a country, but it is just in terms of like terminology and like up-to-date studies. The studies are a little bit out of date. But it is specifically about how race affects people in the sphere of education, from kindergarten, preschool, daycare, very, very young age, the development of race, and like how the school system is a lot of kids' first introduction to the outside world, outside their family unit, and how that impacts their understanding of race in schools, and then going all the way up to higher education and teaching, and how like race plays a role in all of that. It's largely about the Black American experience, because that is the author's own experience, but it also goes into a large amount of depth about other racial identities experiences in the United States that I thought was really interesting. Yeah, I really liked this book. I thought it was really like informative, and I'm just trying to make a better effort into like reading nonfiction regularly and like developing my brain. So I thought it was really good for that. And I think the audiobook is narrated by the author, and I think she does a great job with that. I love when audiobooks are narrated by the author. I highly recommend, if you want a sort of a standard nonfiction like introduction to a lot of the terminologies about race, or if you want a book to recommend to someone in your life who you want to educate a little bit more about racial dynamics in the United States and how those work, I thought this book did a really good job with that. And then my last category for this video is everything else I read this month in between books for vlogs and audiobooks. The first book was actually the one I think I finished on like December 1st. Like, I was so close to finishing it in November, but I didn't. I talked about it a little bit in some vlogs back in November, but that is A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine. I had a vlog where I talked about the first book in this duology, A Memory Called Empire, and I mentioned that I was reading the second book and really liking it. I finished it and I loved it. I gave this book 5 stars. I love the way this duology wrapped up. I love how the science is explained in this book, and how, while the Empire is not just like defeated or destroyed at the end of this series, because that isn't really the point that the author's trying to make, it's sort of shown how unjust systems can be combated by new generations and new learning. I love the new characters that are introduced in this book. They add so much to the story. Sometimes when you're reading a series and you're introduced to other characters other than the first characters, you're like, I just want to know about what's going on with the first characters. But here I got even more attached to the new characters than I was to the original characters. And I loved all their dynamics. I talked a lot about the plot in other videos, but this duology is set in space, and it's a space empire where the empire of Texcalan, the main empire, rules about a quarter of the known universe. But in the first book, they make contact with unknown life forms that are causing destruction at the edge of the empire, like the border of the empire, specifically very close to the space station that our main character, Mahit, is from. So she obviously wants to protect it. So she brings this threat to the attention of the empire to have the empire deal with it. And the second book is basically about making contact with those aliens. So it's very much like a first contact novel, in the way that the first book in the duology was like a kind of murder mystery vibe. The second book is like a first contact with aliens sci-fi extravaganza that I thought approached language learning and how do you like communicate with a species that we don't even have like the same methods of communication with. I thought that was really well done. And it kind of it's also meant to kind of put in perspective that in the conflict in the first book, it's stationers, Mahit and her people, are seen as barbarians by the Empire. But when you're comparing them to this alien life force, they end up becoming like, well, obviously we're all human. Like, we're not barbarians, we're all human, and these are a different species. But then they also have to learn to connect with that species. So first they have to learn to connect between themselves as humans. And I thought that was like a very positive messaging put into a book that is otherwise like, it could have been like a really like depressing messaging. And there's also fungal systems of communication, fungal networks, and I love a fungal network sci-fi concept. So I ended up really, really enjoying this conclusion. I liked it even better than the first book, which I gave 4 stars. The second book was 5 stars. I highly, highly recommend this duology. If you have not read it, it is perfect and it's beautiful and it's just peak sci-fi. Just peak sci-fi writing, and approaches so many different elements of sci-fi that I love, like language and fungal networks and first contact aliens and what would an interplanetary empire system look like and all of that. And I wish we had more in this world because it's obviously massive and even more can be done with it, but 2 books is still very good. The second book I read was a book that I own physically, but I just don't have currently with me. It's in my book collection in DC, and that is Iron Widow by Xiran Zhao. I was rereading this book. This is a reread because the second book in the series, Heavenly Tyrant, came out this month. I'm currently in the process of reading that one. Very exciting. And I wanted to reread Iron Widow because I read it ages ago. So for context, the first time I read this book, I gave it 5 stars. So I'm not changing that rating now. I'm leaving it as 5 stars in my Goodreads. But I think upon this reread specifically was probably a 4-star reread. I think I've read so many great books since reading Iron Widow. And also I was a lot younger when I read Iron Widow, and it is a YA book, so it was more like in my sphere of reading at the time. And I think I've grown out of the writing style just a little bit. But I still really loved it, and I still really love these characters, and I picked up on so many more little vibes between the characters' relationships now that I know what happens at the end of the first book on the reread. So I really did love that. And I still really recommend you at least try reading this book because it has a very unique action-based writing style that I think could really work for some people that have been missing that kind of writing and like are craving that writing and don't even know it yet. I think it's really unique, and I think people should try it. But yeah, this was a reread in preparation for Heavenly Tyrant, the second book. The first book largely deals with the fact that the main character, Zetian, tries to recruit herself as like a concubine pilot for the army in order to take down the man who she believes killed her sister. But before she can do that, she is thrown into a battle. And in these battles, normally the women concubine pilots are just drained of all their energy until they're killed. But instead, she has such a strong will that she kills her co-pilot, her male co-pilot instead, and takes his power, thus the name Iron Widow. And after that, the army is like low-key trying to kill her off, and they pair her with the strongest pilot, who just kills every single woman he's paired with. And she manages to survive that, and the two of them like team up together with her childhood best friend, and there is a polyamorous relationship, and I love them. And then there's a massive reveal at the end of Iron Widow that obviously I knew about going into the reread, that I'm really excited to see how it's handled in book 2. Book 2 is much longer than Iron Widow, which is why it's taken me so long to get through. But I am still really excited to read it, and they do have beautiful covers, so that is always a plus. Then I read, I think it's over here. Yes, it is. Then I read Lighthousekeeping by Jeanette Winterson. I just got flooded with dust in the face. This is a literary fiction book about a girl who grows up in a little island at the very, very top tip of Scotland, like in the middle of like nowhere. Her mother dies, so she is taken in by the local lighthouse keeper and is told stories about the founding of this lighthouse and how it came to be. And her life is sort of put into the parallel lives of the other people who have visited or been to this lighthouse. It's very abstract, which is what I normally like about Jeanette Winterson's writing. I don't think this book necessarily worked for me as well as some of her other books did. So I gave this 3.5 stars. I still liked it. I still really enjoyed it. And I love some confusing prose that I make sense of, and there were still some moments of really beautiful writing in this, but I just didn't feel like it was as good as some of her other books that I've read, so I'm kind of comparing it to that. And I feel like the point it was making wasn't necessarily as interesting to me specifically. So it was kind of a dud compared to how much I was expecting to love it, because Jeanette Winterson is one of my favorite authors. But we persevere. I have like 3 more Jeanette Winterson books that I can read, and I think I will like. But that's why I wanted to pick up this one before those, because I didn't think this would be like her best work. But I'm still happy I read it, and I still had a decent time, and there were still some really beautiful quotes in this. As you can tell from you can't really see because they blend in, but my tabs on this book, I still really enjoyed it. And then, oh no. The last book I read this month in December was a big momentous occasion because I was finishing up a huge series for me this year, and that was Greywaren by Maggie Stiefvader. It's literally been so long that this is a 3rd book in a trilogy, in the Dreamer trilogy. This is the last book in that trilogy, and it's been so long since I read the 2nd book that I haven't even talked about it on this channel. It was back in August that I read the 2nd book, so that was way before I started my channel or did any sort of wrap-up videos, so I haven't even talked about this series at all other than briefly mentioning it in my favorites of all time list. But I love the Raven Universe books. It's a 4-book series, and then the Dreamer trilogy is the spin-off trilogy that follows Ronan, one of the main characters from the original series, in like kind of more an adult setting. Like his boyfriend is off at college, he is now an adult dealing with more adult issues, and I think that's maybe why I loved it and it resonated with me so hard, because in the first series they are teenagers, they act like teenagers, I loved them for that, but I feel like Maggie Stiefvader does a really good job as writing them then as adults dealing with adult issues. I also loved this spin-off trilogy so much because Ronan, the main character, has 2 brothers, and 2 of the new characters, Jordan and Hennessy, are sisters. So this spin-off series really, really deals with sibling relationships in like an amount of depth and love and care. And sibling relationships are like my weak point in books. Like a well-written sibling relationship will always make me love a book. So I love this trilogy. I remember the 2nd book didn't necessarily hit for me as hard. I think, what was it called? Mr. Impossible. I gave that like 4 stars, but Greywaren was 5 stars. Maybe partially nostalgia goggles because finishing this journey with these characters was so emotional for me. But I love these books. I love these characters. Ronan and Adam were my favorite characters in the original series, in the Raven Boy series. And I'm like, there's no greater gift on this earth than getting a well-written spin-off series about your favorite characters from the original. I loved what Maggie Stiefvader did with their characters, especially in this 3rd book, the way that Adam and Ronan come together after their conflicts in the earlier books. And Adam is way more in this last book, Greywaren, than he was in the first 2 books in the spin-off. And the new characters that are introduced or gone into more depth with, Declan and Jordan, their relationship, I loved the character of Hennessy so much. I love Jordan and Hennessy's dynamic. We deserve more Jordan and Hennessy in this book, honestly, but I think it was sacrificed so we could have all of the Adam Ronan scenes we got, and you know what, I'll take that. But if you've not read the Raven Boys and the Dreamer trilogy, or if you've just read the Raven Boys and not read the Dreamer trilogy, I really recommend reading the Dreamer trilogy. It's just as like nonsensical in terms of the magic system as the original series was. Nothing really makes sense. And once you accept that and embrace it and you're just in it for these characters and how well written the characters are, then I think you will love it just as much as I did, because love these books, love it. This is my kind of YA, is like found family YA will hit harder for me because I'm not necessarily like a YA romance girl, because I didn't experience that much romance when I was a teenager. Like that just wasn't who I was at the time. I was a nerd. But I had a really amazing group of friends who I still love dearly. So those kinds of like friend group dynamics really, really work for me. And that's the best part of these books. But yeah, I think I managed to keep that somewhat brief. I think I skimmed through some of these books. But yeah, please feel free to comment below if you have any more questions about any of these books, or if you want any more recommendations about any of them or want to talk about them. Because I did go through it kind of fast, and I like to chatter. So I didn't get to this time, but that's okay. But thank you so much for watching. As always, like, comment, subscribe, whatever you're in the mood for. I hope you had an amazing 2024. I hope you finished the year on a good reading high. I finished it by reading Greywaren and crying in H Mart. So I had a great end of year. More 2024 wrap-up content is incoming. I'm a little bit sick, so my voice is kind of quirky in some of these videos. I apologize. I hope you have a great beginning to your 2025, and I will see you in the next video very soon. Bye!